Hey guys.
Hello.
Hey.
How's it going? So we were talking, as producers do, and trying to figure out what we're gonna pivot in this spot with some of the speaker cancellations. And we thought we'd get together and kind of talk about producing. And a lot of people in the industry have different definitions of producing, and depending on where you are, your day-to-day responsibility can be different. And we've got a wide variety of perspectives here, so we thought we'd just kind of chat about it. So I think a really good question that a lot of people just don't know, what would you say you do here? What does a producer do? What do you do?
Yeah,
Nevin,
good
what do you
question.
do?
So at Hobbs, it can mean a lot of different things, because especially a very small team. For me, that's looked like leading creative teams to do projects. And that can incorporate, I guess, talking to clients, creating SOWs, making schedules and delivery or deliverable lists and all that kind of stuff. But mostly the way I try to paraphrase it, I guess, is putting creatives in a position to do their best work.
Awesome. Yeah. And then Rebekah,
Yeah.
you have just gone freelance producer.
I have.
So I would,
Yay! Thanks, guys.
So I would love to hear from your perspective.
Yeah.
As some of our fine freelancers might be looking for a freelance producer,
Okay.
call Rebekah. What would you say you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah, so it's a little different. I hop around from studio to studio, so that mostly means that I get to jump in and understand and learn the goings-on of any certain studio, and try and understand their creative team, try to understand their processes and their voice and the way that they like to do things, and adapt to that, but then also bring the strengths that I individually have to their processes. And I typically jump in after the award stage, but every once in a while I get the privilege of helping bid out a project or plan it out with all those lovely schedules and all that good stuff. And then, from there all the way to delivery on any given day. Yeah.
Awesome. All right, TJ, what about you?
For me, it's a bit more, I'm a little less on the day-to-day. So for me, it's more about building the team and protecting the team more than anything else. A lot of it's building networks, finding all the talent that we're going to bring in. We work with a lot of outside studios, so building those relationships. But I work mostly on the bidding side of things and setting up the contracts to kind of hopefully protect our team before we even start the project. And then a lot of it's just kind of helping people grow and teaching them new skills and how to communicate.
Awesome. And then Dotti?
So I'm the executive producer for Golden Wolf, but I'm also the only producer on the New York side. So my job can really span from being on the day-to-day of projects and dealing with postings and workflow to more top-line perspective. So figuring out what kind of projects we're going to take on as a studio, and that really defines the overall direction that we're taking as a studio as well.
Yeah, that's great. Something you said, Rebekah, I feel like adapting, for you particularly as a freelance producer, you're having to adapt to every studio you work with. But for all of us, adapting is a huge part of what we do. Adapting to each client, each request, the team's needs. What do you feel? I feel like adapting is hugely imperative to being a producer. What about other things that make a good producer?
I think a good teammate. I think there's definitely a lot of room for us to be leaders as project managers, but I think we're better producers when we find ourselves as a part of the team that's helping corral the team, to encourage the team, and then also rely on them for their expertise, kind of like what Dotti was saying earlier. So a real team player, I think, is a trait of a good producer.
Anyone else?
I think we also set the tone for how a project is going to run. When we're nervous, our artists are nervous. When we're anxious about a timeline, we're sharing that with our team. So it's our job to absorb some of the shock from our clients and manage expectations with them to set our creatives up for success. And if we want to be team players, that's the tone that we set. If we want to come about it in a really transactional way, then that's the tone of the project. So we really define a lot of how it feels to work together.
That's interesting. And like, again, for a lot of our audience, if they're freelancing, they're interacting with the client directly, like they're absorbing that shock. And like, that's a lot to take on in addition to like doing the actual work of creating it. Any advice on like how to not combust and take on the shock with grace?
I mean, for me, it's always remembering you don't have to answer in the moment, and, you know, taking a minute to breathe and, you know, maybe go curse in the corner for a little while, and before you come back with an answer, and taking the time to actually think about what your strategy is going to be, because when you know what you're going to do about a problem, you can feel better about it, but it takes time to get to that point.
Yeah, I feel like I learned way too late that I didn't have to know the answer to every question on a phone call. So like, if a client asks you something like, I don't know, is an absolutely appropriate response. I think a lot of people get caught into feeling like you have to kind of fake it and know everything, and that can kind of put you in a shit situation sometimes. So taking a moment to really evaluate if you want to commit to something before you actually commit.
Yeah, I was really curious. Am I allowed to ask questions? I was really curious, Rebekah, just from going off of what Dotti said about absorbing the shock of bad client feedback, or like, oh, a project fell through, or like, oh, actually we have to cancel that hold, or like stuff like that. I'm curious, like, the way that I typically work is like, we're able to really build rapport with our team. Even with like freelancers, we have freelancers that we're able to work with consistently and eventually become buds with. But when your job is entirely working with new people every single time, I'm curious like how you absorb that shock, or how you like avoid that kind of lashback without having the rapport.
Oh, so like maintaining relationships with artists when there's an issue that affects them?
Right, like creating relationships with strangers and having to deal with telling them hard things when you have no rapport to build back off of.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of what Dotti was saying, like you kind of have to act as a shield. And so there is like a way to for me, it's more of like a understanding the situation and like absorbing it, as you were saying, and processing it, and then examining it in a way that can solve problems before I bring a problem to them. So maybe presenting them with a solution or some type of understanding, or sometimes it's budgetary. Like if a project gets canceled or something and there's just no way to keep their hold or something, just figuring out a way to get them paid or to move them on to another project, or, just kind of like taking into consideration their situation and doing everything you can to do right by them.
Totally.
Yeah, I think it's about like the transparency, because like when you don't have that relationship already established, you can only try and be a good person, right?
Yeah.
And try and be as transparent as you can, so that eventually you'll get that relationship and they'll learn to trust you. I think that's a huge part of it.
And I think like sometimes producers, especially really busy ones, can treat artists like commodities. And I think that's completely wrong, and that's why we're all here today. That's what we get to do every day for a living, is the work that you guys put out. And so I think just simply by treating, artists as like exactly what they are, which is the talent and the amazing people that create this work that gives us all jobs, then I think that automatically creates some rapport.
I think a mistake a lot of producers make in protecting their talent is just not telling them a lot of the information, and they think that's protecting them, and then you find out later, or the artist finds out later, and it puts them in a harder spot. And once you've done that, it's really hard to get that rapport going and to build that relationship. So, I mean, for me, it's I try to take people out of the office. I try to like really get to know people on a one-on-one basis. Like you said, kind of getting to know their situation and just let them know that like I'm here for them more than I'm here for the project. The other thing I'll say is like, there is no real bad news. I think that's what you'll learn the longer you do this. Like things seem like the biggest deal. I'm coming up on 20 years, like none of this matters. We make videos, we get to make cartoons. No one's gonna die. We're gonna be fine.
My husband does like medical device,
Yeah.
like engineering, and I'm just like, oh shit, like they could like really kill somebody. We can't.
Yeah.
I think that's probably one of my favorite tweets that I've seen this year is like someone said something along the lines of like, I asked in an interview if the person that was hiring me, if they had, how they deal with emergencies. And the person who was interviewing said that like, oh, I don't have Slack or email on my phone because there's no such thing as a design emergency.
Yeah.
And I was like,
I would love to know like how y'all, I don't know how I ended up here as a producer. I think it's so interesting how producers come from all backgrounds and kind of get to this position in various ways. Where did you all start?
Okay,
I'll pick some.
I actually started out on the creative side. So I went to school for audio engineering. Thought I was going to be an Aunt Food or a Jen Peg, who are here today. And I ended up really loving the visual side a little bit more. So I started animating, thanks to Taylor Yantz, who is also here today. And yeah, so I started out as an animator, decided that I loved pulling the teams together and managing the process a lot more than the creative. Plus, I wasn't that good at it. And ended up I ended up being head of production at Ivy and really enjoying production. So yeah, producing is the best.
Cool.
I mean, mine's pretty slow. I started out as an editor and animator and realized pretty quickly I wasn't very good at it, but I was really good at like pulling people together, and a lot of animators I was working with at the time struggled with communication and talking to people, and I was better at that side of things, and so I could still hang out with my friends if I just like helped manage the project for them and let them do the thing that they were better at.
Yeah, y'all are cool. Creative people are cool.
I had a kind of circuitous path to production. I didn't go to school for it. I went to school for English and French and wanted to get into publishing at a time where publishing was dying. So I started working at an Apple store because I needed health insurance. And I started making the schedules for the stores, and I wound up making the schedules for the Fifth Avenue flagship store of 800 employees on a 24-hour pipeline.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah, except way less fun. So I needed to get out of that world, and my friend was working at a motion graphics studio, and I was like, what's motion graphics? But she brought me in as a production assistant, and 2 weeks later I was producing a documentary, and then a year later I was the senior producer at the studio, and it's kind of all moved pretty quickly from there. But I think with production, you need to put in the time to understand the pipeline and the technology, and so that you can be really educated when you're working through it. But so much of it is also just a personal skill set of how you deal with human beings and bring them together as a team and are able to manage emotions and process. And that doesn't necessarily have to be something you learn in school. You can come to it in another way.
That's great. Nevin?
Similarly, circuitous path as everyone else. I started out doing photography and video. I eventually started getting into animation from kind of like like the fanboy side. I was just like, oh, that's so cool. I wish I could do that. And I think as I was starting to graduate college, I started sneaking in more and more motion graphics into like my jobs that I was winning. And so I really got into it, but I wasn't very good at it, which I don't know if you're noticing a pattern here.
Yeah, we've definitely got a theme. We're all failures.
All failed animators.
But I think part of what helped that is I understood a lot about the approach, and I understood a lot about, I guess, more of the technical side. I think I started really getting interested in that part. And I started working with teams. I started hiring people to help me with jobs I was doing at the time when I was freelancing. And I was like, oh, this is pretty fun. Like being able to help people do work that's way better than anything that I could have done on my own. And so actually, TJ is the man who helped me into like motion graphics industry as a whole and introduced me to a bunch of people and got me set up with the folks at Hobbs. at the beginning. And so I think I started as animator, photography, video, and kind of moved more into management and now producer. Yeah.
Cool.
I interviewed Nevin, I think he was a student or maybe just recently graduated. And as soon as the interview was over, I was like, fuck, he's so much smarter than me. I am screwed.
That's great. I was a photography major, so similar failure. Realized I wasn't good at that, or didn't want to be good at, or didn't want to work as hard as I needed to be good at it, honestly, And so similar weird path. That's a note that if you are a failure, doesn't mean
Come be a
you're
producer.
stuck.
If you,
Be a producer. You can be on this panel. You were talking about earlier, TJ, like working and trying to get to know people in order to really establish those relationships. And how has that changed when we're not face to face these days?
Yeah, it's definitely harder. It's hard. It's been interesting. It's been hard to onboard people. I mean, you can do the process, but to get them to feel like part of the team is a lot more difficult. Certainly a lot more like one-on-one Zooms and stuff you can start to do. We try to interject a lot of like personal projects and stuff. I try to like actually create them as projects, not like in your extra time. And so that the team gets to work on something together that's low pressure. There's no client involved. But at least gives them a chance to like learn how to work together, and hopefully they start telling jokes and liking each other and all that. But yeah, it's definitely a little harder these days. I from that aspect, I prefer when we're in the office just for building that initial relationship. I'm a huge proponent for remote work, but I do think it's a little bit trickier to get started.
Do you think it's going to change in terms of working with teams all over, all time zones? Is it changing clients' expectations? Like, we can now work 24/7.
I think it can. Not to be harsh on anybody. Like, I think it's lazy producing. Like, I think there's no excuse for it. I think you can be really efficient. You can technically have a team working 24 hours a day without anybody working overtime, because we can now work in all these different time zones. But I have like really strict rules where it's like there's no Slack communication during certain hours, because as soon as you get a Slack notification, like even if you're told you don't have to respond to it, you feel this pressure or it's in the back of your mind, and so then you're kind of ruining somebody's evening. And I think better work is made when people are fresh. And so yes, I think there is an opportunity for people to get overworked, but I think really good communication, a solid producer should be able to communicate to the client and make sure that there's enough space that there's no reason for you to be working overtime.
Anyone else? What have y'all been, kind of opens it up to just generally working remotely through the pandemic? Challenges, advice? Nothing.
I don't think it's anything different than anybody else's experience. Like just sitting in a house and staring at the walls that you have to look at all the time.
Did you remember when we were excited
every
about
crack. It's yeah. I went and got like an office downtown in Nashville because I needed to get out and like be inspired by the world. So I mean, that's been helpful. Just like going to an office and then feeling like I'm a part of a workspace, even though my coworkers are on a screen in front of me. It's helped.
What about y'all?
I think it forced me to really get into precise communication, because it's very easy when you're not able to look over someone's shoulder and be like, oh, wait, that was supposed to be like entirely different size and dimensions or whatever, or whatever. Being very precise with communication, both with check-ins and initial briefings, like all that kind of stuff, without having to have 30 Zoom calls a day, because I think we're all just so tired of it. But I know that was a lesson for me, precise communication, and then also like just making time to be friends with the people you work with. I think we're lucky in that we're a very small, young group, and so we are just buds. And I think making and intentionally creating space for us to do that, both in the context of the work Zoom and also like on the outside work Zoom. Yeah, exactly. And being able to say, all right, maybe we'll do like we'll log off early and log on and all play Nintendo together and get whooped up in Smash Bros. Or
Cool, you guys
know,
do that?
Yeah. And I think creating space for that allowed us to continue to build rapport while not just having to be in the trenches together, because I think trench rapport is way different from like riding a high rapport. So.
Yeah, you said the whole communicating differently. Like, I don't know what it took me to realize or how long it took me to realize that I was slacking like I would talk, which like wasn't communicating properly. It would have been easy to like just say something, but like you have to be really prescriptive. I think that's something that just we can all take from how we communicate with each other, understanding the situation you're in and being really particular about what you're asking for or how you're communicating, because you don't have that face-to-face.
Especially if you're working like internationally, you just have to be 1,000 steps ahead. Of the production and make sure Australia knows what they're doing tomorrow.
So you can sleep.
London knows, and making sure they know exactly what's going on and exactly what's needed of them at this certain time so that our delivery's met. Like it's a lot of thinking, a lot of brain burning.
It's also a lot of trust, and trusting that your team are all professionals and they're going to get the work done when you've set them up for that. There's always that moment as a producer where you're like, I don't know if it's done yet. Like, is it going to be done? How's the render? Is it done yet?
ETA.
And when you're in the studio, you can be that annoying hovering art director. You're just like, how's it going? But when you're remote, you don't know. You don't know how
Pinging,
far away
like,
you are.
how's it going? It's such an ominous ping.
It is the worst.
I'm so sorry.
And then as soon as you ask that question, you're like, now I'm taking them away from it too. So I'm just adding to the time frame. And there was an element of having to take a step back and be like, they will get it done. We will get it done together, and we can trust that we're going to do it because that's how we've been working. And as a control freak, it's a little hard to give up, but I think that's been my big learning, is just like letting people do their thing.
Yeah, so important. TJ, you were talking about like setting time aside to do like a personal project and like going in on that. Like, I think the Dash team, our like project was the intro video, but that like was not low pressure because we like finished it on like Monday. But how do you, in reality, how do you set time aside for things like that? Because I know all of the people here, freelancers or wherever you are, like making time to do your own work for you or for a team like is so important, but it's so hard when you could potentially be, if you're a freelancer, like taking a paid gig away.
Yeah. I'm in an unfortunate situation I have to like acknowledge, right? Like I work for a giant company. We have the bandwidth to be able to pump the brakes and build some space for that. When I had a studio, it was harder to do. I mean, we've done title sequences like, those aren't the same fun personal projects. And it's different for a freelancer. I want to, like, a lot of this group is freelancers. And so you're right, like you are carving out time. And for the freelancers, I would say it doesn't have to be an animation. It can be if that's what you want to make. But like for me, until recently I had a farm. Like that was my thing. Like I carved out time where I was like, I'm going to be outside. I'm going to be working with animals because I need to be fulfilled in a different way than I am all day long. And I think that's the part that's like super valuable. When it comes to like the team part, coming back to like how to make a personal project, one big thing is like I treat it like a project. I actually scope it. I get buy-in by the company. I'm like, cool, this is like how much we're investing. This is the amount of days I'm going to give the team. But I also, beyond that, like someone's going to direct the project, and whoever wants to be a part of that can be. And other than that, I'm just there to support, and I don't try to like direct it. And I think like when a studio's involved, sometimes it gets a little trickier, and like everyone wants to play a director, and the roles aren't really defined. I think that gets really messy. But what I try to do is bounce around the team throughout the quarters, where it's like, cool, one team member got to run a project for a week or two this week. We're heads down for a little while. We're going to pop back up. The next director, whoever's got an idea. And I let them come to me with their ideas. I don't like put the pressure on them like, cool, it's your turn. What are you going to make for us now? You know, it's on them. So It's a long-winded answer, but yeah, I think that's kind of it.
What about you, Rebekah? Just from like a freelance perspective, like taking time away from schedules and
Yeah.
production work.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I'm still learning. Like Sarah Beth and Taylor and I have been working on a film, which we get to talk about later today. And that's just been a matter of like flexibility, like staying flexible, but also aware of goals. That is so like vague and not actionable at all. But that's what we've kind of been thinking about. Is like, how can we figure out resourcing for a project that doesn't have a budget? That's like terrifying. But I don't know. For us, it was finding people that were really excited about the work and just wanted to be on board in their free time. How we got people to do that, I mean, they're just generous and amazing, and yeah, wanted to join hands with us. But I feel like I'm still a noob when it comes to figuring this out. But I mean, before going freelance, I produced 2 or 3 passion projects at IV, and it was the exact same thing that TJ said. We think about it as a project, a client project, where it has a scope, it has a budget, it's got the team that's very clear and who's working on it, and executing that around client projects is a beast all in itself. But yeah, I don't know, still learning there.
Pivoting a little bit to like looking for freelancers or bringing on a team, how early on in whatever project or brief or pitch y'all are working on do you immediately start, you like know who you're gonna, what team you need? Like how quickly does that form versus like waiting for idea to come to fruition? It's like the 2 things need to happen in tandem. How does that go? Help me.
I'll jump in.
That's a good question.
I mean, for me, I don't staff a project till I know the brief, period. Because like, I want to set whoever's on the project to be set up for success. And if that means I have to buy more time before we can kick off, that's what it is. But like, to pull in a freelancer, I mean, this is a terrible example, but pull in a 2D freelancer and it turns out it's a cell or a 3D piece, like, it doesn't really set anybody up for a good project. And so I might start putting loose feelers out there. There might be something coming up, but I'm not gonna like really try to book anybody until at least we have the inkling of like, this is the style we're going for. And then we work really fast.
Yeah, our projects tend to come in so quickly that we have to kick off within a week or so of getting the brief. So we have to move pretty in tandem with developing the creative and finding the team that's going to work on it. And so Henry, who's one of our team involved with resourcing, is always chatting to people. And it's not necessarily about an immediate project, but just to know who's available and who's out there. And we also love getting emails when people are just like, hey, I'm free. Just knowing who might be around, we have that kind of floating in our heads as we're planning out the project. And if we've been in recent communication, then we know like, oh, that person said they were free, like we can probably get them in. We don't do blanket holds with people. We try to be respectful of everyone's time and reach out when we have a legitimate project that's actually moving forward. But also as a small studio, we don't always know if it's moving forward until it does. So we kind of have to play this dance of reaching out to people, getting availabilities, having people lined up, and we don't know if it's actually going to happen. So it's I don't think it's an ideal system, but it's also somewhat what we're dealt with, the kinds of projects that we get, that we have to be able to jump and run with it pretty quickly.
I think Dotti brought up a really good point, is like, we don't start when we get a brief. We're like always talking to people, I mean, it's just, I know this whole crew, so like we're always talking to the community and trying to meet all the new people we can so that we can identify like, this person would be awesome for that project. And like you said, like having a sense of who's available before we even get a project.
And so how do you find the community?
Yeah.
When they're not sitting in front of you? Like when something comes up, like where do you go immediately?
Good question.
Instagram.
Yeah.
Instagram's pretty big.
Instagram and Twitter.
Yeah.
Yeah, I have the honor of being on some little like side chats on both Discord and Slack, and there's a lot of chatter there and a lot of resources being passed around. And so, yeah, asking friends and friends of friends and friends of friends of friends, it's usually the way I find people.
And also looking on like industry groups as well, like Panimation or Women in Animation, like going to other areas that way we're not just going to like the people that we know, because there's so many people that we don't know yet that we would still want to work with, it's always really easy to go to the people that we know and we've worked with before, but we do want to continue to branch out, and sometimes that's just kind of cold emailing people that we've never met before, we've never worked with before.
Yeah, I think we've spent a lot of time, in addition to like understanding what people do, like it's very easy for someone to say like, I'm a generalist, or like I'm like a 2D animator, or I'm a, I'm a 3D guy or gal, etc. But something that we've tried to do is really understand what people are interested in doing, and that's helped us get. I mean, in addition to talking to interns and people who are looking for jobs and like permanent positions, talking to freelancers who are able to share with us like, yeah, I do 2D animation, I do like HUD animation, but I'm like really into like really goofy. Man, I hate that we keep saying this, but like whenever we say fart jokes, we're like, oh, we sent him to Gunner, but like. But whenever we have someone that says like, oh, we're interested in UX motion, I think that is a phrase that we throw out there surrounding Hobbs that actually helps us bring in people who are interested in that type of work, and that allows us to get people who have a vast variety of skill sets, but have interests that align to specific projects. So one of our processes, especially when we get a new brief in, and very similarly, we have a lot of ongoing relationships so that, briefs come in hot and it's like, yo, this is what we're doing, we're gonna start tomorrow, and sometimes that we're able to have a little leeway on that, especially like with people we have on staff. But when things come in hot, we're able to say like, oh, that feels like this type of person, someone who's interested in this, and like we think of a person who has that type of interest, and then we look and say like, all right, let's try to name 3 other people who are like that, and actually start creating a pool. And I think that's something that especially as we've been going into the new year, trying to create a more equitable pool for each opportunity that we put out.
And how do y'all store that? Because Mac and I have a
Good question.
pain in the ass of a spreadsheet.
I use Notion.
Notion.
Yeah. And I like what you were saying. When I talk to freelancers, I like to ask at the end of my emails, even if it's just like a hangout email or whatever, saying hi, it's like, what is your dream project? What do you like doing? What's exciting to you? What gets you going in the morning? And usually it's something completely out of left field that's not in their reel or something like that, which I find really exciting because you always get to, at least in my little Notion spreadsheet, I have a little column of like what they say, and usually a project will come up with a studio or something, and I'll be able to advocate for that person to, hey, maybe this is the person that you should hire on this project.
Right, and I would say to all the freelancers out there, those emails that you send that's like, hey, these are like super quick, tight little email that's like, these are 4 projects that I've been working on recently, and these are like 2 things in my personal life that are like kind of cool that I've been into. Those emails, I don't want to speak for all of us, I love that. Like, please tell me, and then it's like, my availability starts this time.
Yeah.
Send them to me every month. Like, I seriously, we love that.
We want
You
to
can
know.
reach Nevin at Nevin, and I'm just kidding.
Nevin at hobbs.org.
Email him every month. Well, I mean, I've talked a lot with freelancers on like Clubhouse and stuff. Like, there's a fine line between like being like too much, but also, and I hate because this is like real shit advice. So like, it's up to chance, but like, it's times like that where you like happen to reach out, and we've just gotten a brief that it's like perfect. And when you've got a million things going on, like that is so helpful to get things like that. So again, like, being concise with the type of work, like the relevant work and your availability, is just, it makes our lives way easier. And I am going to forget who said this, but it was in the Panimation Slack, and they were talking about putting at the top of their website, like, booked until X date. And I was like, my God, please do that. Everybody do, like, because I'm gonna go to your website and look at your reel or whatever you've done recently. And if I get to your website and it says you're booked until the end of whatever date, or I'm looking at my schedule and I see that it would line up, like, that is beyond helpful. I don't know if y'all have any other, like, tips or ideas about things like that.
I can't remember who the animator is, but there's somebody that has their full availability and their rate just like right on the top of their page, and I thought that was genius. I was just like, yeah, I mean, it cuts a lot of it. But the only thing I'll add to what Nevin said is, don't get discouraged. Like, if you've written to a studio and it doesn't work right then, or they don't respond, sometimes we're too busy, but try to respond. But often, like, just because you're not the right fit for the projects that are happening when you happen to write that one doesn't mean that you're not gonna be the right fit in 2 months. And so I think the motion community as a whole tends to be a bit introverted, and I think it's hard to put yourself out there in the first place, and then you get a little bit of rejection because you weren't booked on that project. And it doesn't mean you're not a good animator, it just means, like, the type of work we were doing at that time didn't fit. And so, like, it's okay to keep checking in. Don't check in every week. Some people do that, it's a little too much. But check in, once a month or so is cool.
But I think that's, like, helpful for people to, like, he's being honest when he's saying, like, it wasn't a good fit, because it kind of can be like a throwaway, like, oh, you weren't a good fit, like, yeah. So to take it to heart that, like, genuinely being honest that, like, we'll figure out something, we'll make it work, something is going to come back around.
For sure. Yeah, I think somebody that does it really well, I think I saw him earlier today, Andy Martin. He's out there somewhere. Yeah, he does a pretty good job. He like hits us up every, like, month or 2 months, and it's like, hey, I'm here, here's my availability, don't respond if you don't need to. And so I always know when Andy's available, and I'm like, ooh, thank you, it's great to know.
Yeah, I don't know about you guys, and I'm actually curious, like, about your internal communication tools, but we almost never use email, and so, like, the main people who are emailing me are freelancers or like email or event invites, and so, like, having those two things intermingled where I have 30 meetings a day, if we don't respond to you, it's not because we don't love you, but just email is sometimes hard. But yeah. I think that's something that I try to make an effort to do, is always reply, but sometimes it just might take some time.
I'm curious what everybody else thinks. So for me, like, Instagram or Twitter is, I create, like, there's an actual conversation and I get to know somebody more than email, because there's, like, the artists that hit me up, but then for me, like, I get probably 10, 15 reps a day that hit me up, and then I get just a bunch of other stuff, and most of it I'm sifting through to get to my client emails. Yeah. So it's hard to, like, put a person to the email sometimes. Mm-hmm. So I do appreciate, like, the availability emails, but at the same time, if it's like a cold call, like, hit me up through a different channel, and it's more likely that we're gonna have, like, a rapport and, like, actually get to know each other a little bit.
I hit you up on Twitter.
Yeah,
and we talk that way. It works.
Yeah.
Well, and again, like, it goes back to, like, you're building a team who has to work, like, humans have to connect and talk to each other to, like, get this done. And so the more that you can, like, find out about the person and, like, kind of casually chat over, like, social media and get to know them as a human, it'll make the project better, just communication-wise and working together.
And you don't have to wait till you need a job. Like, yeah. We're just people. Like, it'd be cool to, like, we like meeting as many people as we can. And so I think that's the other difference, is, like, some people hit you up and they're like, it's very clear, like, I want a job. And it's like, cool, I can't fulfill that for you. But then I think the better route are the people that are just like, oh man, I loved that project you were on, can you tell me about it? Or for me, it's like, I get a lot of people asking for advice. So it's like, I'm going through this, and then I try to work with them on that. And, like, that's just it's less transactional, it feels more genuine of a connection.
And then what about, so you've worked on a project with X freelancer, like, what makes you go back to them? Like, the way they work, the way they communicate, like, talk about that.
I think for us, especially having very specific project types and new ones being added all the time, someone who understands an area of our expertise. But I think, honestly, the biggest thing is communication. I would hire someone who is pretty good and an amazing communicator and reliable over someone who's amazing and only replies to my Slacks like every other day. I think consistency, communication, and competency in their area.
Yeah, I think that's really true. It's knowing that that person's going to be there when you need them, and having gone through that and seen how they work and how you work together as a crew. You find the people that you can trust, and you can have them come back again. And I think it's the people who are also excited about working together and are clearly enjoying the process, because it is a two-way street. It might not be transactional for us, but it could be transactional for the freelancer who just needed the gig at the time. And we're always looking for something more than that. So somebody who really engaged with the project, interacted with our team beyond just here's my work in progress. We want to have more of a conversation with people and really get to know them. And it's obviously easier in person, but we at Golden Wolf, we're in New York, and most of our production team are in London. So we've been working with remote crews pretty much the whole time I've been at Golden Wolf. And the people who come back are the ones that you form a human connection with beyond just the postings and feedback cycle.
Yeah.
And do you feel because at Dash, we're pretty small, so when we bring in a freelancer, it's nice to really bring them in and feel like they're a part of the team, like you're saying. Do you feel that with being remote, it's almost easier because freelancers are anywhere, right? So you don't have that, if they're not in the office, even if it was before a pandemic, if that's not possible, you still can maintain that relationship or that kind of relationship, get to know them virtually.
Yeah, absolutely. It's the world that we're all living in now, so we're kind of all equalized at that point. There's no longer just the people who are in office on one level and then the remote workers on another. We're all kind of doing the same thing together.
I want to go back to communication. You're talking, Nevin, about just, how important it is, and for someone that's, just them freelancing, they're not being paid to communicate, they're being paid to produce something, and animate or illustrate, design. And so advice about, because it's kind of a funny thing to think about, no one goes to, people go to school for communication, I shouldn't say that. But I'm not gonna tell them to go go to the Google school of how to talk to other humans, but it's just so important, and it's not, it's a soft skill. We're not inherently taught in school how to be a better communicator, but yet livelihoods depend on it when it's not really what they're being paid to do. And so that's a balance of taking the time to communicate ahead of time so that they don't end up screwing themselves later, because they're the ones that have to handle it. Totally.
I think a big part of it is setting expectation beforehand, knowing when we're going to check in, knowing the rhythms of the project. I think I should probably clarify a bit more what I was talking about is we like to bring someone on and truly make them feel like they're a part of the team, especially if they have that same mindset of man, this is cool. This is cool that we're making this for this giant tech company, but I kind of want to break this apart and figure out how it would actually work, and think about have that mindset as we're going into it. And so when we have someone who has the product point of view going into a project, where I think I'm going to throw out his name, and you guys can snatch him up, but check with me first. No, I'm just kidding. Michael Kuzmich is amazing at this. He'll send me a file that says hey, I updated this is the file number, here's the link to it in the Dropbox. I adapted this by 5 pixels, and literally goes above and beyond, which, you're saying, is not what people get hired for.
To instead of just here's the latest.
Right, and he's a super senior and has earned that over time, but is something that makes us be yo, Kuz, what are you up to this week? So I think communication in that way, and then also, we like to bring in people who, in the context outside of the project. So, the stuff that we talked about, let's, even on like a Saturday, let's all just like log on and point our cameras at each other and play Super Smash Bros. Or Mario Kart, or, meet up at the apple orchard, or, bringing, I think a big part of what we try to do is make it a little bit of a community, which sounds so kumbaya, but it's pretty true.
We're all sitting next to each other.
You're right. All dance.
Are you inviting us to go apple picking in Detroit? Because I am so
Come
down.
on, guys.
It's the first day of fall, so that's like super on brand.
But I think just to piggyback on that, I think the way he just that level of communication would be stellar. Not expected at every level necessarily.
Very true.
More important than communication, to me at least, is like, be fucking nice. Like Dotti said, like, there's no room for egos. Like, that's so true. I've worked with so many of the most talented animators where like the attitude that comes with the talent isn't worth it. Like, I would rather take somebody slightly less talented and give them more opportunities because they have just such a passion and excitement and a great attitude. And that helps the rest of the team, where like one amazing person can kind of poison the well, like if they have a bad attitude. So be a nice person. And then for the communication, like, there's an in-between too, right? Rather than just saying like, here's my files, or like giving you every single detail. Like, I love when somebody sets me up, if we're new to each other, it's like they let me know how they like to work, and that way I can kind of structure the project around knowing that. And then like, if you're gonna miss a deadline, don't tell me when you miss it. Tell me like in the morning, like, hey, I'm worried about today, and we'll come up with a plan. It's the people who are like, sorry, I didn't get to it, and it's like that's when it becomes problematic.
I think that's a really good point, TJ. It's so easy to want to please somebody, and I think producers get this a lot. We're checking in, and we can feel like the artists want to give us the answer that we want. And we would really rather get the honest answer. So when we're checking in and somebody's like, yeah, no, I got it, I'm gonna be fine. And in my head, I'm like, are you gonna be fine? Like, we would rather have somebody be like, I'm not sure, I think I need a little bit more time, or I need help. Like, we are here as that resource. And I think that's a big part of production, is we're here for you to lay your problems on us, because we're gonna help you find the solution, and we're gonna work together to do that. And we are only able to do that when we're getting that communication from our artists, when they're telling us what they need, what they're struggling with. We'll work together and we'll help find that solution. And I think that's the communication we're all looking for in advance, is let's face our problems head on and work together to get those solutions.
100%.
Yeah. Whoa.
Ew.
Jinx.
200%.
2,000%.
2 million. No, I was gonna say, yeah, it's okay to advocate for the time that you need to get the job done. Like,
Yes.
we really, really want to know that, and we want to give you that time. And if we can, we 100% will, and we'll maybe even move stuff around to make it happen, because we also are invested creatively too and want to make the work good, just as much as you do. So please tell us.
Yeah. We talk to freelancers about assignments and like, hey, this might look like a lot, and it might be a lot, but like, to your point, tell us that as we go through it. 200% would rather have you tell us that, hey, I need help, and we'll find it, because we're thinking ahead about that stuff.
Yep.
Okay, this is a question for me. I just want to know y'all's answers. So thinking ahead of stuff, I tend to spiral. Like, I'm thinking about what's gonna go wrong at every moment, which is why I shouldn't plan events. But like, so how do you think through all of the possibilities without like overwhelming yourself or overwhelming your team or overwhelming your clients or imploding?
I think the big one is to know, like, even as you're thinking through the problems, like, you've solved these problems before. Maybe it's not these same exact issues, but you've gone through it, you've found a solution in the past, and if you haven't and you've dealt with the problem afterwards, then we'll get through it. You eventually do get through it. And I think when you're setting short-term achievable goals that you can kind of check off that can eases some of the stress. When you look at the really big picture, like, yeah, that's terrifying. There's so much that can go wrong. But then you break it down into smaller pieces and you're like, well, I can check that off my list. I can finish this. I can go to that person for that. And suddenly it's not so big and scary anymore. And trusting in yourself that like you're going to be able to deal with those problems when they come at you. And you have to live with that ambiguity a little bit and just like trust you're going to be able to figure it out.
Definitely. I mean, first of all, there's no formula to producing at all. And you also can't assume that everything's going to go wrong, and you can't assume that everything's going to go right. And like Dotti was saying, like you've kind of just got to take it day by day and understand that like it's a ride, and we're all on it together. We plan for it, we prepare for it, and the more experience you have as a producer, the more you've solved all the problems and can solve them again. And even if you fall flat, then that's a way to learn and to be able to solve that problem in the future.
Yeah, I think a big shift for me was like failure is the best. Mm-hmm. Like, and I think like once you embrace that, it's kind of makes things a lot easier, right? Like you're talking about spiral. I spiral all the time. At the same time, I know there's absolutely no point for me to plan for everything because everything I plan for as many years as I've done this,
It's all gonna go wrong.
Something will change. Some new CEO will come in and change their mind and want a different video. It's just like no matter what you do, there's going to be something that comes up that you can't do anything about. And so the more you just like lean into that, and then learn that like I learn the most when I fail. Like I mean, it sucks when you're in it, but then like a month later, you're so much stronger because you lived through it. That I actually really kind of look forward to those situations at this point.
Yeah, that's great. Go ahead.
Oh,
No.
sorry.
Go. You
I
go.
just wanted to say that I kind of do two different approaches. One of those is really kind of what we talked about in our talk, which is like identify the problem and remember the problem that you're solving, not the problem that you created for yourself. So like it's easy to say that, I overbooked someone and there's actually a bunch of time hanging off at the end. It's like, okay, is it a personal problem or is it like a money problem? And figure out between those two with the other person. And like, I think that was one of the biggest things for me to understand. And then the other side of it is like, there's no such thing as a design emergency. Like the sky's not falling. No one's heart is going to fail because of it. There's money in
that though.
There's money in the balance, but I think there are more important things than that, which is probably a scary thing for a client to hear. So,
We won't tell them.
yeah.
Well, we are actually out of time, if you can believe it. I learned a lot. I hope that was valuable for y'all. My main takeaways are be a failure, communicate like a human, go apple picking, and be a nice human.
Yep.
It seems
You wrapped it up.
great.
That's it.
Thank y'all so much. Round of applause for our panel.